Welcome to this session on saturation church planting. In this session we are going to talk about the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper that we celebrate today has very little resemblance to the Lord's Supper as they used to celebrate in the first century church. What we have now is doesn't resemble at all what they used to do in the first century church. An ordinary meal was considered as the Lord's Supper when the church got together and they ate it as a family. They ate the meal as a family. This was considered the Lord's Supper because at this point the church gathered together to celebrate. And we read in Acts 2:46 that they joyfully shared the meal together. They broke bread and they enjoyed it. We see this breaking of bread as a family is an occasion to rejoice, not only the death of Jesus but also the resurrection of the Jesus. That's why they were happy. And we see Jesus advocating this in Luke 10. We saw wherever you go, you eat with people, and the whole thing is eating is a very important part of the family of God. We see even in the Old Testament in Exodus 24. Where God invites the 70 elders from Israelites along with Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, and all these people gather together in the presence of God, and God gives them a meal. They saw God, it says, and they ate in verse 11, chapter 24 of Exodus, and they ate and they drank. Now, when God served a meal, we don't know what He gave them to eat and to drink, but it certainly would not be just a crumbs of bread or just a sip of wine. They must have had a decent meal in the presence of the Lord. And we see the Israelites, when they celebrated the Passover meal, which is what Jesus gave to His disciples, this celebration when the Last Supper, when it took place, it was the day of Passover. On that day He gave a proper meal, the Passover meal, and the Passover consisted of the Paschal lamb. In Exodus chapter 12 and verse 8 we read what the Israelites had when they were in Egypt the last night when they're about to leave. They're all dressed up, they are wearing their sandals, they have their sticks in their hands, they have their belt, and they eat this meal standing up, ready to go. And what do they have to eat? They had a roast lamb, and they had bitter herbs, and they had bread, and unleavened bread. And so this is a meal that they had, and this is the same meal that was served when Jesus gave His disciples. And He said to them, you do this as often as you meet together. So we see in 1 Corinthians 11 chapter in verse 20, we see that there are some problems in the church of Corinth. When they get together, there are rich people and there are poor people. There are some disputes in the church. There are also women who have some problems because they are participating in prayer and prophesying without covering their head. They have shaven heads, which we have listened to before, that shaven head and uncovered head in Corinth was the symbol of the temple prostitutes in the temple of very famous temple of Venus. And so all these problems were there, and on top of that, when they got together to have a meal which they call the agape meal or the divine meal or the love feast, the rich people would come and they would eat their meal before others, and so some people ate their meal while others went hungry, and Paul is very angry about this. and he's saying, he said, this is not right. You must eat this meal together, and you must share your meal with those who do not have the meal. So it was a proper meal, and they had to share. And so Jesus broke this bread, and in verse 24, excuse me, in verse 25, Jesus, after the supper is over, and after the supper, he took the cup, and then he said, this is in remembrance of the blood shed, his blood that was shed for us. So it was a proper meal that Jesus and his disciples took. They had roast lamb, they had bitter herbs, they had unleavened bread, and they had wine, and all these things Jesus gave when he instituted the Lord's Supper to be done in his remembrance. Later on, this was converted by church into a sacrament, and then it was hijacked by the priests in the church, and the church then decided that this can only be served by the priests, and this was never the intention. It was a common meal, it was a simple meal which they shared joyfully with each other. So a restoration of this function of the church, to have a common meal, joyfully remembering the death and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, as a family together, sharing whatever you have with each other, is what constitutes the Lord's Supper. We see Jesus is even after his death and of his resurrection, we see Peter in John chapter 21 decides that he is going to go fishing again, and not only goes fishing, back to fishing, he also takes a few disciples with him, and then and they, of course, they toil all night and catch nothing, and next morning Jesus is at the shore. After 3.5 years of training, these men are back into their old profession. Very disappointing for any rabbi, but this is what happened, and so Jesus has to coax them back and to do what he had trained them for, and so he tells them he asks them, have you any food to eat? And they say, of course, no, because they hadn't caught anything as usual. And then Jesus says, this time they have a great catch, and they catch 153 fish. It's counted, and I counted 4, and we don't know the exact significance, but people say that at that time they believed that there were 150 different kinds of people groups in the world, and so all these 153 people groups are in the net, and this time the net does not tear. And so that's a very significant number, and it's recorded in the Bible, so you must take cognizance. All the people groups are to be in the net, and Jesus then calls his disciples, and Peter comes over there. He recognizes this is the Lord, and when he gets there, he finds there is hot coals over there, there's hot bread over there, and that there is a fish being roasted over there, broiled over there. So Jesus calls them, and he says, have breakfast. And in the breakfast, Jesus has cooked this breakfast, and he's serving the breakfast. He's giving them hot bread and broiled fish. What a lovely breakfast, first thing in the morning on a seashore. And then next thing, of course, he's talking to Peter, and he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I do. And then he says, feed my sheep. Feeding is a very important part, and all the discipling that we talk about we have to be part of the family of God and feed each other. Of course, we have to feed spiritual things, but we also have to feed food. And we know that when Jesus will come knocking on our door, and if we open the door, he will have supper with us. He will have meal with us, not just a meeting, not just a kind of speech or something, but a meal, a relational thing. Meal is a very relational thing, and so we have reduced the Lord's Supper to a sacrament, to a ritual, where a holy man comes in holy clothes and we all kneel down with very somber faces, and then he gives us a little crumb and a little sip of wine. This is not Lord's Supper. This is a caricature of it. The Lord's Supper is when we all have meal together as a family of God, and we share what little we have, whatever we have, with each other. And this is a very, very important function. So we should get back to the original value, the Lord's Supper, for which it was started by our Lord, and that is to share joyfully our meal together with our other believers. And this way we will find the church will grow and multiply. May God bless you as you think and ponder over this matter of changing the Lord's Supper into what the Mother Church, the original church, the way they celebrated it. God bless you.